Hi, and welcome to the Window Film Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Vinnie Driscoll, and I'm excited to be joined today by Nick St. Denis, Vice President of Research and Data for Key Media and Research, to discuss the outlook for the film industry entering 2026. Nick, welcome to the show.
Vinny, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's a beautiful day here. Looks like it's the same. You're in Virginia, correct?
Yep, finally cooling down a little bit. So
Yeah, we're finally getting that fall weather. I'm excited for it. Not too excited because we barely had a fall so far. I'm worried that we're going to go right into snow like in 2 weeks. So
yeah,
let's
same here.
let's keep this 65-degree weather going. I'm excited. But anyway, Nick, before we get into the conversation, we're going to talk about you're a research guy. You've been a research guy at KMR for a while, and we're going to talk about what you're seeing for 2026. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been with KMR for about 12 years. As many know, KMR is the parent company of Window Film and PPF Mag. We're also organizers of the WFCT trade show. So I've been involved in the market and in the industry for a little over a decade. Started out as an editor with several of the publications, and then we launched the market research division in about 2017, 2018, because we had a lot of demand from primarily suppliers and dealers on more market data and gathering survey research insights and so forth. So I've been working, directly with companies in the industry, providing data and insights for them, and economic forecasting and stuff like that. So, and been presenting at the WFCT trade show for probably 6 or 7 years and exhibit there and all sorts of things. So, I kind of have more of like a broad overview, higher end look at the industry. Of course, I don't work in a shop, so I don't
Right.
have all the background
Sure.
of an installer, but sort of more of a broad overview of the industry and being able to talk to both the supply side and the dealer side on what they're seeing throughout the U.S.
So you have more like the 10,000-foot view of the
Right.
industry.
Yep.
And you mentioned that you go to WFCT each year. You do a session on what you're seeing in terms of where the industry is at currently and what it looks like heading into the next year.
Yep.
I know that you did the session last month, and you
Hmm.
also for the magazines in their last issue of the year, you also write like a market update.
Yep.
So going into 2026, you said the industry is on firm ground, which is
Hmm.
great. But what indicators support that confidence of yours?
Yeah, so it's an interesting industry because the automotive and architectural films market can definitely it's sort of a broad range of subsectors. And what's really neat about it is that particularly on the deal, well, manufacturers and dealers both tend to offer products across the spectrum.
Hmm.
So whether that's automotive film, architectural window film, PPF, vinyl wraps, etc. So it's one of those industries where if you're diversified enough and
Hmm.
good at a lot of different things, you can sort of ride the wave of where the market's headed,
Sure.
and you can sort of pivot if necessary. And I think that's kind of been the strength to the industry. So while there are some headwinds that we are seeing in the
Hmm.
market and in the economy, there are other areas that are kind of picking up the slack, and I can talk about some of those.
Yeah. So I mean, I think diversification is clearly key to this, and I going back from the beginning of time, as far as I was, younger, becoming an adult, I was always told in terms of stocks diversification, and I
Yep.
think that is kind of what we're seeing in terms of like those who are able to kind of withstand headwinds are those who are diversified. Can you talk a little bit more about like the diversification, like we talked about like the multiple different types of film, but like what is a good sort of business model in terms of diversification?
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of like need to find a balance of it, of course. If you're really good at one thing, then perhaps there are certain segments that aren't for you. But like for example, on the automotive side, PPF, paint protection film, has been
Mhm.
a massive area of growth over the past 10 years or so, past 5 or 10 years, but really over the past 5 years, pretty extensively. And so we've seen, obviously a lot of businesses in the window film segment kind of adopting PPF, and that's not anything new. That's been going on for
Hmm.
for a while, but you just see them getting better and better at it, and PPF becoming a larger and larger portion of their sales. And you see that, I guess, like I said, on the supplier side as well. Um, so that's kind of one example from the automotive on the automotive side. And then, there are some film companies that, like window film companies, that focus more on flat glass architectural versus
Hmm.
automotive. But then there are some that kind of do both, and sort of they have their subsectors in each. So just kind of being able to find that balance where you're doing kind of more than one thing, but still trying to do it well enough so that it's not a
Right.
disservice to the industry is important. And I think this industry has been really good at that.
Now, do you find that the trend is more people are going into diversification, or are more companies going in, like putting their eggs into one basket? I mean, I looked at some of the top dealer data, and I noticed that there are a lot of companies that do either or. They don't do
Mm.
both. I mean, there certainly are the companies that do both,
Yeah.
but is the trend for diversification, or do you see a trend away from that?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a trend of diversification in a lot of ways in the industry is just being good enough to offer the product, or at least have connections where you can
Hmm.
refer, and those sorts of things where there could be a shop or a dealer that's a window film shop but offers all these different things, and if you look at their website, for example, it'll show all the products that they offer, right?
Mm.
But they might do 95% of the one
Right.
thing and then 1% of each of the other things. But the point is that they do offer those, and or
Sure.
they're able to help the customer get to that.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we see it going, is sort of being able to offer those products if necessary. At the same time, like I said, you want to do enough of it where you're actually good at it, and not just slapping it on to
Sure.
make some extra money. So I don't think there's a trend definitely away from it. I think there's a trend more toward diversification, but I think it's been a slower kind of just like naturally
Hmm.
occurring thing across a
Right.
lot of the
Right.
dealers, and a lot of suppliers as well, are offering a more broad portfolio of products. And you look at like an Expel, for example, that was primarily focused on PPF, and the share of
Right.
their market on the window film side is becoming a bit larger and larger. So you're seeing it both on the supplier and the dealer side.
Right. So we have the pandemic hits, obviously 2020, 2021, we come out of it. We see this tremendous growth after
Mm.
the pandemic. Now it's kind of cooling down. Has the industry hit a new normal, or do you foresee another boom coming?
Well, a lot of what came out of the pandemic was, of course, inflation had a lot to do with
Hmm.
inflating
Sure.
the total values of the market and revenues of companies and things like that. But also a little bit of pent up demand, and consumers kind of going back to spending a little bit. That has kind of subsided a little bit. So that pent up demand, and then also that, and inflationary pressures have kind of eased a little bit. So that's sort of made overall revenues and growth flatten a little bit. But there are some things that are causing a pullback in some ways, but there's also other tailwinds. Like, for example, new vehicle sales
Hmm.
have peaked a little bit a year or two ago,
Hmm.
have come back down, and are forecasted to sort of be flat over the next several years. Now, that's a key driver to PPF, for example. However, even though new car sales and new vehicle sales are sort of flattening, overall consumer awareness of PPF, as well as the the broader scope of installations, for example, going from an accent or a partial installation to a full vehicle coverage, is becoming
Hmm.
more common as well. So even though something like a new vehicle sales figure might be showing flat, there are other things at play as well that we can continue to see growth with. And I know it's window film. We're talking primarily about window film, but I use PPF as sort of an example
Right.
as to what's happening in that area.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think education is big, and I think that we're seeing more and more of that, especially as people are buying more high end vehicles, and I think the high end vehicles are coming with a certain amount of interest in protecting those vehicles, and I
Right.
think with PPF, it's an investment in the your paint, and making sure that you don't 5 years later you're not having to replace the paint. You invest this relatively small investment compared to a new paint job, and I think that that's starting to become more the norm with higher end cars. And I read an interesting quote the other day that I was reading a blog, and someone had written that cars today, high end cars, are pretty much like almost equal to what some people bought their first houses for. And
Hmm.
if you think about that,
Yeah.
like I'm thinking more of the older generation who bought their
Yeah.
car their houses for like 75,000, $100,000. People are spending that on their cars today.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you invest in some type of protection,
Right.
preventative maintenance? And that's where I think the film, we all know that that's what the film does, but it's the consumer awareness. Hey, there's this product out there, and it's starting to kind of become more well known for people who are buying cars.
Well, and that the new price, the price tag that you're seeing now on new vehicles is also part of the reason why sales have kind of flattened too. Because
Right,
I don't know about yourself, but even my wife and I bought a not even a new vehicle, a several year old vehicle, still relatively new, a couple of years ago, and it felt it was the equivalent of buying two new cars like 5 years before that. So
right.
you see that as well, and the other thing too is like going to the window film side. The nice thing about window film is that it's less. It's less of a result of new, things like new vehicle sales
Mhm.
because people are
Right,
tinting, people tint vehicles, regardless.
right.
And especially if you're planning on keeping a vehicle for longer, a used vehicle
Hmm.
for longer, you might want to put in some kind of upgrade such as tint or something like that. So
Sure.
yeah, so again, that goes back to the sort of the dynamics of this industry and having
Right,
being able to kind of serve several different markets at once.
right. So, talking about the, new vehicle sales easing a bit, you mentioned that it peaked, I think, last year, 2024, and it's starting to kind of ease a bit. How can automotive film dealers keep growth steady, knowing that there's this sort of flattening out with sales?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's just like expanding the scope of what you're doing on a vehicle. Like whether it's for PPF, it could be doing more full coverage vehicle versus partial coverage, and then just like looking at other things like window film or any type of automotive aftermarket product. A lot of the market is based on referrals and return customers,
Hmm.
and so kind of growing that base, it's like you can still find solid growth despite some sort of more macroeconomic indicators
Hmm.
not being as strong. um, I think it's just that's sort of kind of the way that this industry is.
Right, right. So let's talk about architectural remodeling, which has also leveled off. What
Yeah.
factors will drive demand there for next year?
Yeah, I think that one's a little bit it's tougher to look at in the shorter term. But
Right.
if you look more in the longer term, there is a general so new construction and I covered the construction side of things too as well. In addition to films, we also have a segment in commercial and residential windows and doors. So you can kind of look at both sides on this, and we're seeing a lot more retrofit and renovation work in construction and less new
Okay.
construction. Okay, and so that kind of also translates a bit towards doing upgrades such as adding window, film, and one of the big drivers that will be coming up that's already kind of happening is a need to increase
Hmm.
energy efficiency in both commercial and residential buildings, but also security films another big one too.
Okay.
So I think those are kind of two drivers: is sort of the need to kind of upgrade older, less efficient
Sure.
existing buildings, and there are quite a few sort of municipalities, like local jurisdictional mandates and things coming up, that new construction requirements already have high standards for energy efficiency, but now we're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of localities pushing for existing buildings to meet certain standards as well. So film could be a
Okay.
solution for that. And then, like I said, on the security side, security glazing and security film, depending on which solution fits best with the
Sure.
application, are both growing.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the suppliers. Like the major suppliers keep expanding while smaller ones seem fragmented. Do you expect more consolidation ahead?
That's a really tough one. That's one I don't want to make any
Yeah.
surefire predictions on. But I will say that if you look at the companies at the top, they have done a really good job of of expanding. I mean, of course, there's been acquisitions and merging and things like that, but they've also
Hmm.
done a really good job at expanding their portfolio, kind of like we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
So the companies that are doing the companies that maybe focused on automotive window film or PPF or architectural film, they're sort of expanding their offerings on those other products to kind of bring everything up. And so you're seeing the larger companies expanding like that. But at the same time, there are a lot of smaller players out there that seem to be very persistent. You go to the
Hmm.
WFCT trade show, and yeah, you see the large players out there, but there are a lot of
Hmm.
smaller suppliers that are still make up a share of the market. So
Sure.
the top half of the market is made up of just a handful, a few different companies, but then you have um, the remainder of it's pretty fragmented on pretty much all sides of film. Mostly on the automotive side.
Okay. Nick, one more question.
Yep.
What else do you see for 2026? Look into your magic research globe and tell me what you see.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered kind of most of it. It'll be interesting to see how you know things in the economy shake out. Like one thing that's interesting is consumer sentiment has been kind of down since the pandemic leading into 2020.
Mm,
Consumer sentiment had been pretty strong for the past 5 years plus. And it kind of came down during the pandemic and has had a hard time recovering. At the same time, you didn't see spending come down that much, which means that people, maybe despite not having the best outlook on the economy and their personal finances, are still spending money. Now,
okay.
a lot of that has to do with borrowing and credit card debt, which is a whole
Sure.
other topic. But people seem to still be spending despite being skeptical of certain parts of the market. So I think that'll probably continue heading into the coming year. And then, of course, if interest rates continue to tick down
Hmm.
here and there, that could spark additional growth.
Why do you think consumer sentiment has been downtrending since the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of more of a macroeconomic question,
Okay.
but just in general, I think the pandemic that 2020 2021 a couple of years there really shook things up
Sure.
for people, and it seems like with so much volatility going on in every part of our lives,
Right.
you just
Right.
haven't seen that confidence come back up.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the pandemic, we'll look back at this 50 years from now, and we're going to look at it like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I think a lot of things were affected, in during the pandemic that is going to be difficult to get over.
Mm,
For many reasons, and I think you mentioned consumer sentiment. Since then, I think a lot of people are just skeptical about everything, inflation, everything that's come with the pandemic has kind of carried over into the mindset of the consumer.
yep.
So we're a little bit more skeptical about everything, and I think it's going to take more than 5 years to get past that. I think it's going to get to the point where we have to get past this inflation that's still part of the 20 or the pandemic. um, it was a pandemic issue, and now it's kind of still in almost 2026 we're still dealing with that. So
Mhm.
yeah, great answers. I really appreciate your time, Nick. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, how can they do so?
Thanks, Vinny. Yeah, I mean, you can just keep an eye out for articles and things like that in the window film and PPF mags, and I'll be at all the WSCT trade shows. And you can find me on LinkedIn, and I don't do a whole lot on the other socials in terms of this kind of thing, but you can find me
Okay.
on LinkedIn and in the magazines.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Vinny. I appreciate it.
All right, for Nick, I'm Vinny. I'll see you next time on the Window Film Magazine podcast. Have a great weekend, everyone.